I walked further up the high street past more boarded up shops in the direction of the supermarket near my house, an area that before the high street moved from Addington Street was rather quaintly known as Westminster. Now cars tear up and down the hill, the drivers in a hurry to pick up their kids and get home for the weekend. And even the minicab drivers, who should know better, drive no better. Actually, it's more than just drivers being in a hurry. It's like they're in a frenzy. And the pavement is unusually narrow, no doubt as a result of road widening. And the York stone paving, which would have been there originally, has been replaced with the cheap red brick that you see all over Thanet. The contractor must have been rubbing his hands when he was awarded that one. As I wonder what they did with the stone, I'm shaken too by the long, deafening blast of a car horn. A van has stopped outside the Polish shop to make a delivery. He's pointing up the hill on the wrong side of the road. A car coming down the hill has to stop and wait for the car coming up the hill, and the driver gestures and flashes his lights, impatiently waiting for the other car to pass. I can see his fingers literally digging into the steering wheel, and his face is contorted with desperation. It's as if the world is about to end. It's as if he's trying to resist time itself. As the car coming up the hill declutches and accelerates, creating an unnerving din, the other car makes a wild swerve around the van, emitting a cloud of black diesel smoke, before it's the turn of the next car to come up the hill. The road is not that busy, it's just the drivers. They see the car journey as a waste of time, and they're fixated on what happens when they get home. Perhaps they can already see themselves with their feet up relaxing in front of the television. And it's as if it's already happening, but it's not real. It's just a projection of the perceived reward, of what they think they deserve after suffering the pain of being stuck in the traffic. Only God knows. It's the mind being the master when it should be the slave. The reality is that they're stuck in a metal box on Ramsgate High Street, and they're not going anywhere. I'm not safe yet. I have to negotiate the junction at Chatham Street and Chapel Place. It's an obvious trouble spot, acknowledged by the large fisheye camera mounted on a Georgian building that was once a corner shop. Coincidentally, Chapel Place was the street where all the doctors and dentists lived, which makes me wonder to what extent the horse-drawn carriages were a menace to pedestrians in the day. From the corner of my eye I can see a red SUV coming down Chatham Street. Actually, it's not red exactly, but a kind of reddy brown, like the dogs made a mess. The colour you would only choose if you were blind and had lost your sense of smell. I can see the driver looking up and down the high street for the oncoming cars, but he doesn't look ahead. He doesn't look in the direction of where he's going, and he definitely hasn't seen me. Should I wait? He's not indicating, so he must be going straight on, right? I better wait. Another car is now coming up the hill, and I can see the driver of the dog dirt car has seen him, and so I step onto the road to cross. But no, he's decided to try and get across the junction before the car coming up the hill arrives, and he guns the accelerator. Still he hasn't looked ahead, and now I have 2 tons of metal tearing towards me at speed. As I leap back onto the pavement, he sees me, and he slams his fist on the horn and stops just inches away. I'm shaken, but my automatic response is to pretend that I don't care, and I raise 2 fingers in the defiant salute of the Welsh archers of Agincourt and mouth the immortal words, "Fuck off." The driver, however, doesn't fuck off, but gets out of his car and waddles towards me in a threatening manner. "You tosser," he growls. I think about that for a moment and decide I can't really argue with it. I suspect it's because of the beret I wore today because it looked like rain. He's in his 40s, wearing a rugby shirt, in a similar colour to his car, both of which I decide, though rather unfairly, were chosen by his wife. I furthermore suspect that they're the version of New Tory that voted for Brexit and Boris Johnson because they don't like being told what to do by Europe, and they're not going to give away their hard-earned money in taxes. His affluence is evidenced by a massive gut overhanging his jeans. The pie shop is that way, I say, pointing up Chatham Street, where there is actually a pie shop. But before the words can leave my mouth, I spot the camera and remember the last time I was set upon in the street. It was me, and not my assailant, who ended up in a police cell. Not that I'm a fighter. He actually cut himself on my belt buckle while trying to ram me with his head. But this guy is clearly a bully, and I imagined for a moment the satisfaction that I would get from his indignation of receiving a smack on the face from a man wearing a beret, but I decide it's not worth getting arrested for. And as I turn to leave, he climbs back into his dog-shit coloured car. My God, that guy must have a massive cock, I think to myself defiantly, suddenly wishing I hadn't, as the image stays a moment too long in my mind. Ramsgate wasn't built for the SUV. In fact, it wasn't built for the motor car at all. That's what all the road widening was about in the 1960s. But why did they see the car as more important than the pedestrian? I guess they couldn't imagine how many cars there'd be 60 years later, and all the problems that come with them. Like the fact that car emissions cause respiratory diseases in children, a fact that only now is being recognised by the courts. On the other hand, people and cars can never be a natural mix. They seem to bring out the worst in us. As soon as you're in one, you become isolated from the people outside. Cars make you selfish. Remember that TV advert for the Renault Clio, where the driver, Nicole, is tearing around the narrow streets of a French mountain village, being pursued by her father, which in itself is kind of creepy. The upbeat brass theme tune is infectious. One of those ones that gets in your brain and makes you want to jump in front of a speeding truck. It's said that people drive faster when they're listening to music. And I certainly did. As a young man, I used to drive like an idiot, believing that if I didn't get to my destination in record time, I was losing out somehow. I wish I'd known then what a waste of time it was to try and save a few minutes of time. I remember when I was a student in Brighton, I came around the corner too fast in the town centre, with Robert Palmer blasting out on my stereo, no doubt thinking about those hot models he had in his band. And suddenly an old man stepped out into the road, and I couldn't stop in time, and I hit him. He wasn't badly injured, but I remember seeing the blood on his leg through the rip in his trousers, and the sorrowful way he looked at me with his rheumy old eyes. It still haunts me today. Feeling somewhat humbled and more shaken than I let on even to myself, I cross the high street and head for the supermarket to pick up some supplies. It's not exactly a superstore, but it's big, and it's obvious to see from the houses surrounding it how many had to be demolished to make way for it. Although it's in the town centre, it's designed for shoppers arriving by car. Pedestrians are expected to take the 5-minute walk around the perimeter to get to the store entrance. Of course, everybody, including myself, takes the direct route, which requires walking up the one-way car ramp and leaping into the flower bed when a car comes. Some of the drivers accelerate past as if you weren't there, while others stop and wait until you're clear. Both are as unwelcome as the other. Particularly perilous is when drivers accelerate the wrong way down the one-way system to exit onto the high street so they don't have to drive around the block. All in all, it can be an unnerving experience going to the supermarket, and I'm unsettled even before I walk in the door. I take a basket from the floor and look up, trying to remember where I am. Facing me is a mountain of cut-price beer and cider, but I'm not going to lug a 12-pack around. I could have taken a trolley, but then I'd need a car to get my groceries home. So press on, I think to myself, still feeling unsure. The scale of the place, the sheer volume of choice, makes me a little dizzy, and I hesitate for a moment, unconsciously blocking the aisle as I try and remember what I came in for. Behind me is a mother struggling with a trolley fully laden with carbohydrates and sugar. Her small children fall about the aisles like drunks. "Put that back," the woman yells in my ear. But her reprimand somehow lacks conviction. Who really cares? There's always more where that came from, and it's of no real value, nutritionally or otherwise. How can that chocolate bar really equal the value of a gold pound coin? But we need to satisfy our greed, our hunger to consume, under the illusion it's going to fix us somehow. Peel off the film wrapper with a colourful logo and taste the sweetly sickness of the chocolate, and the momentary high of the sugar hitting the bloodstream, and then the dump into emptiness, until the sirens awake and begin to scream, until you have another one. Who's eating who, I wonder, as I throw a Terry's chocolate orange in my basket, remembering when my mother wouldn't let me have one. We're all willing believers in the false promise. The reality is just too painful. We want to be seduced by the savings, the price drops, and the 2-for-1 offers. But we know how to shop, we're not stupid. We're getting a good deal. It's not about the money, it's about the reward. The staff, brightly clad in contoured polyester, frantically stack the shelves, as if the future of mankind depended on it. Our essential workers, our masked heroes, who take less money so we can save more. They are too hypnotized. We're all willing participants in the grand illusion. But these days we're less controlled by how much we earn than how much we spend. With only half a brain, I head straight for the wine aisle and stand in front of the French section trying to decide if I should buy the one I want, which is more money, or the one on offer, which I know I'll regret. I put them both in my basket and head for the till. Now what did I come in here for? I can see an empty till and I accelerate towards it, hoping that no one will get there before me. The cashier scans my wine and chocolate without making eye contact. "Do you need a bag?" she asks as she grabs one. "Yes, please," I say, as I secretly berate myself for forgetting mine. A bag for life. A plastic bag, not recyclable, but for life. At only 12 pence, which everyone, including myself, is more than happy to pay, just for the convenience of not having to remember to bring one. An image of the plastic island in the Pacific the size of France drifts into my head, and the dolphins and whales trying to eat it, and the turtles with Q-tips stuck up their nostrils. Maybe it would be better if they didn't sell bags, and then people would have to bring their own, like in the old days. Oh, for fuck's sake, I just said in the old days, you sad old fuck.
How are you doing?
I'm brought back to life by the friendliness of the cashier, the total absence of judgment of what I'm buying, what I'm wearing or where I come from. I know she doesn't really care about me, but the intimacy of the unexpected human contact makes me well up a little, and I want to hug her.
Okay, sorry about that.
Instead, I hide behind my smile, stuff the receipt in my pocket, and head towards the exit.
Thank you.
The security guard looks at me suspiciously over his mask, but it's okay. I haven't stolen anything, though I feel guilty anyway. "Thank you, goodbye," I say, wondering if any normal person would thank the security guard. And then I remember what I came in for. Milk and butter. But I'm not going in. Not today anyway. From the car park, I can see that work has started on Townley House. It's a white stucco neoclassical mansion that was owned by Mary Townley, who designed it, as well as a number of other grand houses in Ramsgate. She threw massive parties for the high society of the day, including King William, Princess Victoria, and the Duke of Wellington, whose headquarters were directly opposite on Chatham Place. Next door was Townley Castle, where guests were accommodated when the main house was full, and it said where the serious drinking and gambling and other dissolute pursuits took place. It was eventually destroyed in a direct hit from a Zeppelin during the First World War. Can't blame the council for that one. Townley House later became a girls' boarding school before falling into disrepair and onto the council demolition list, but was rescued by the Farley family when they opened their furniture store. I went there once hoping to look round, but the salesman couldn't acknowledge my sense of entitlement and wouldn't let me in. But I couldn't help but notice that the building had a strange atmosphere. It turned out there had been reports of a haunting in the form of a single ghostly white hand floating through the air and touching owner Harold Farley on the shoulder before disappearing through a wall, making him run through the building and leaving him quivering and speechless in a chair. So bad that everyone thought he had suffered a heart attack. As a precaution against the return of the ghostly white hand, the house is now being divided into flats, and the malevolent apparition being banished to the supermarket next door. I head down the ramp towards the high street. I'm grateful to be out in the fresh air. I turn the corner and walk past the Eagle, the 18th century coaching inn, built for the visitors down from London before the railway got here. It's sad to see it in such disrepair. Ramsgate badly needs quality food and accommodation if it's going to rise from the ashes, especially in this area between the railway station and the town. The Eagle isn't the only pub to close in recent years. It's happening all around the country. Pubs can't compete with the cut-price booze on offer in the supermarkets. People drink more at home now, and they drink more. Numbers for all of the fatal diseases are going down except for liver disease. I guess it reflects how we're all becoming more and more isolated. The world of television and computers has become the reality, and the world outside is shut out like bad weather. The Eagle is Grade 2 listed. I looked it up on the Historic England website. But when it was sold at auction, the land behind it was sold with planning as a separate lot, meaning the pub no longer has a car park. Houses have now been built there, and the new residents routinely submit objections to anyone putting in an application to use the Eagle as a pub or a restaurant. The only remaining option is to convert it into yet more flats, which would mean more cars parked on the street. So now it's just another decayed old building on the high street, and it'll sit there rotting until the council lets someone knock it down. Apparently the name derives from an eagle shot in flight over Ramsgate, and given the fate of the pub, it's not an inappropriate analogy. As I get back to the house, the weather turns in. The silver clouds turn to black, and it starts to rain. The extension roof is leaking, but somehow I'm comforted by the rhythm of the drip, drop, drip of the water onto the kitchen floor. It's just a shower, and it won't last long. I feel entirely at home here. I feel safe. Somehow I knew I would come to Ramsgate, not just because I love the sea and the faded grandeur of the town, but like the ghosts of one of those visitors from the glory days of old. I'm searching for something. It's as if I'm one of the characters in the story, and I'm playing myself. I was living with a girlfriend at the time in London. I'd found the house online. I knew it was the one, and immediately called the agent. But another buyer had just got in there before me. Months went by, and then one day I got a call to say the offer had fallen through, and I was next in line. I had manifested it. I was so happy when I moved in. I would wander around the house saying, "Thank you, God, thank you, Jesus." I had a place to be, and I'd paid off my mortgage. Praise the Lord. Okay, so I'm not religious, but I did feel blessed. I wasn't separate from everything after all. I can have a say in what happens. I'd had a fear of being homeless since I was a teenager. I had this recurring dream that I would find an abandoned flat somewhere and live there in secret. The front door was hidden behind wallpaper and had been long forgotten. Home wasn't a safe place for us children. My parents would get drunk and have violent arguments, and my sister and I would lie in bed shivering, not understanding what was going on. Even when there was harmony in the house, we were largely ignored. It was an ultra-modern bungalow in a village of old houses, and my parents thought it was great. It had electric garage doors and built-in speakers in every room. They named it Santa Fe because they thought they were in a movie. But I wanted to live in a castle where I could lower the drawbridge and shut everybody out. When I left home, I moved into a squat off Fulham Broadway. The entire street had been condemned by the council to build a supermarket. I'd hitchhiked down from Yorkshire with my best friend to begin my new life in the big city. He later died of a heroin overdose when he got in with the wrong crowd. But somehow I survived and find myself in paradise. And in a way, so did he. The first thing I did was rip out everything the vendor had put in to sell it. Boxed-in pipework, raised floors and false ceilings. Under the plasterboard I found the old fireplaces, the Georgian wall panelling and secret cupboards behind the chimney stacks. I went to the local salvage yards for an old sink and a bathtub and bought the ones with stains on the bottom so they looked like they'd been there forever. Without exception, anything that had been done to the house in the last 50 years had used cheap materials, poor workmanship, and was invariably ugly. So it wasn't what I did to the house that made a difference, it was what I undid. As a boy growing up in the north of England, I remember the Victorian buildings in Bradford and Harrogate were so proud of themselves, made of York stone and red brick, with terracotta and marble. They were built to last. Today the lifespan of a new build is around 50 years. At the end of my street there's an ugly hoarding with graffiti and weeds growing out of it. It used to be a 300-year-old detached Dutch gable house with a fair bit of land behind it, where until fairly recently there was an iron foundry that produced drain covers for the roads. You can still find them around the town bearing the maker's name, TV Bond. The house was pulled down just before I moved in, about 5 years ago now. I find the planning consent online for demolition, an erection of a block of 12 flats But the developer is in no hurry to build them, and the council in no hurry to make him. Apparently the house wasn't listed, which is strange, because all the surrounding buildings of that period are, including my own. It turns out that it was a compulsory purchase by the council, who then sold it on to a developer. I emailed the Conservation Department at the District Council to find out more, but get no reply. After several more attempts, they tell me that they can't comment, and they refer me to the press office. I don't doubt that some of the conservation officers really care about the town and its historic buildings, but it would put them in a difficult situation to admit the council had been negligent. It's their livelihood after all. I discovered that anyone can propose a building to be listed by going direct to Historic England. That way, even if the council have granted demolition, in theory it could still be stopped. I email them, but I hear nothing back from them either. Public organisations say they want public opinion, but really they don't. I expect they mostly just get people complaining. I knew if I was to be taken seriously, I'd have to find out more about planning and conservation, which I think is known as, if you can't beat them, join them, an expression from the 1930s that I'd assumed originated in the north of England, and I can almost hear my grandfather saying it, although I never met him. Turns out, of course, like all the good things, was from North America. When I lived in London, I was a stone's throw away from Highgate Ponds and would swim all year round. It's all changed now. There's lifeguards and an entrance fee after they spent millions on what the locals regarded as unnecessary engineering works to prevent flooding. But the sea will always be there, and on the whole no one can stop you swimming in it. I checked the tide times online. It's best to swim at high tide, and I grab my trunks and towel and head to the beach. I avoid the main sands and the possibility of spectators and head towards the beaches by the port under the West Cliff, where I'm told the serious swimmers go. Before the land was reclaimed for the ferry port, there was a paddling pool on the beach that would fill with water at high tide. There are several of them along the coast, but most of them are now filled with rocks and sand and have fallen into disrepair. They're still good for crab fishing, I'm told. Until the 1980s, when the council demolished it to create a car park, there was an Olympic-sized swimming pool on the East Cliff, with high diving boards and changing rooms and cafes. Built in the 1930s, it was the premium attraction for the town in the summer for almost 40 years, until it fell into disrepair. Perhaps by then people had developed a taste for heated swimming pools, like they had for heated houses. But in any case, it's now a massive car park that even in the summer only attracts a handful of cars. I arrive at the West Cliff and look down at the beach, known as the artificial beach because tons of sand were imported in the 1920s to service the increasing number of visitors, and it included chalets for changing and lounging and the paddling pool for the kids. On the cliff top was a pitch and putt, a model village and a new bandstand and monkey house. As visitor numbers began to dwindle, the bandstand was demolished and the area flooded to become a boating pond. Today a new bar has opened, which is as good as the Royal Pavilion for a cigar and an IPA, and they have pizza that you can actually eat. There was a remarkable domed structure behind the Lookout Cafe, known as the St. Augustine War Memorial, which would have looked more at home in some far-flung corner of the Ottoman Empire, but that was demolished to make way for the concrete block lavatories that stand there today. How quickly the sacrifice of war is forgotten when you badly need a pee. Remarkably, not only has the artificial beach survived, but it's still popular with dog walkers and fishermen and swimmers all year round, in spite of the ugly port area, now inhabited by the dreaded cement company. The elegant Art Deco lift fell victim to council cuts in the 90s, but that's okay. I need the exercise. Today there are probably 20 swimmers milling around and chatting. Most of them are women in different states of undress, pulling on bathing hats and gloves against the cold. Some of them already in the water tug bright orange floats behind them as they cross the bay to make them more visible to jet skiers, or if they drowned. The ones drying off, their bodies bright red from the cold, are struggling into their thermal coats or sipping hot tea. I walk past the derelict cafe and cross the road onto the sands. Well, there's no point hanging around, I think to myself, and I strip off, wishing I'd worn my trunks under my trousers. I struggle into them, trying not to fall over, and then breathe in a little to hide my gut as I stride purposefully towards the sea. 150 years ago, those that could afford them used bathing machines that were pulled by horses into the surf. There were literally hundreds of them on the Thanet coast, essentially beach huts on wheels. They provided the bathers with somewhere to change their clothes and a certain amount of privacy, as it wasn't considered respectable for women at least to be seen in bathing attire. Men were permitted to swim nude until the 1860s, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whose celebration of the glories of nature wasn't confined to his poetry. "It was glorious," he remarked from his bathing machine at Dumpton Gap. "I watched each time from the top step for a high wave coming, and then with my utmost power of projection, shot myself off into it for all the world, like a concrete rocket into a whale." And then he complained the water wasn't cold enough. Officially, the Ramsgate season ran from August to October, but for reasons of economy, Coleridge preferred to sojourn in the late autumn. In a letter to friends he wrote, "Oh, I wish you were here, and that we could all Ramsgateise till the midst of December." As a child he'd contracted rheumatic fever, and as an adult suffered from depression and bouts of crippling anxiety, which might explain his addiction to laudanum that he would buy from the dispensary on Broad Street. It's still there, but now converted to flats. Tortured by guilt because his wife wouldn't let him see the children and he was unable to make a decent living, he had a long but unrequited love affair with William Wordsworth's sister, and later an obsession with the wife of his friend Dr. Gilman during his frequent trips to Ramsgate. "Let the little bosom cold melt only at the sunbeam ray of gold. My pale cheeks glow, the big drops start, the rebel feeling riots at my heart." So Coleridge was also enamoured by a woman's breast. Men's obsession with them must surely hark back to being a baby. I don't know this for sure, but Coleridge very possibly had a wet nurse, as he never bonded with his mother, who was described as distant and cold. I was a child of the 1960s, which was the Dr. Spock era, whose worldwide bestseller advised new mothers to leave their babies to cry. Years later, he admitted he got it wrong, but by then the book, which had a worldwide appeal to mothers with better things to do with their time than be mothers, had already made him a fortune from sales worldwide. I never got to suckle my mother's milk, but had some powdered chemical muck instead. For me still, the most comfort and feeling of being complete is a bosom for a pillow and my lips around a woman's nipple. Not any nipple, you understand, and certainly not one belonging to anyone who reminds me of my mother, but the connection is made nonetheless. When I was a young lad, I must have been 10 or 11 I guess, I had a friend in our village who was a bit of a tomboy. We were too young to be having sex, apart from the odd wet kiss. But I was at that age when I started to be fascinated by women's breasts. And I do remember that she was completely flat-chested. She was a little older than me, I think. But anyway, one day, I was back at prep school, and I was exploring the attic. We weren't supposed to be in the attic, but it was the kind of thing that we did when we were bored, which was most of the time. And amongst the old furniture and leather suitcases, there was a pile of old clothes that presumably belonged to the headmaster's wife, because it included the most enormous bra. I mean, it was massive. I assume now that it was a maternity bra, as she'd recently had a baby. But anyway, as a joke, I decided to send it to my flat-chested friend. It wasn't a cruel joke, and I feel she would have taken it in the right spirit. And so I parcelled it up and addressed it and put a stamp on it and put it on the shelf with all the other outgoing post. The following day I was called into the headmaster's study, and I could tell I was in trouble because his face was kind of twitching, and he informed me that my parcel had been intercepted. And my first thought was, that's a pity, because I thought it was funny, and presumably because I didn't show any embarrassment. The headmaster pointed to the telephone and said, "Do you want to call your parents and ask them if they think it's okay to send such a parcel?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." And as I stepped towards the telephone, thinking my parents would also have thought it quite funny, he punched me in the face with such force that blood started literally gushing out of my nose all over his Persian rug. And he said, "And you can clear that up for starters." But he didn't make me clear it up, and I headed for the door. Funny, I hadn't thought about that for probably 50 years. Perhaps it was a combination of thinking about women's breasts and cold water swimming, which was also a feature of prep school life. Every morning we had to line up naked and take it in turns to jump in a cold bath before breakfast. And we had to swim naked in the swimming pool, which was unheated and outdoors. No wonder I still have trouble with my ears. Anyway, back to the beach. Without the benefit of a bathing machine, a swig of laudanum, or a suck on a tit, I hesitate for a moment, my toes already starting to numb from the cold. But knowing it'll only put off the inevitable, I stride on. A wave of green water rises towards me, and I jump up to delay getting my trunks wet. I get away with that one, but another even bigger wave follows. It's said that waves come in cycles of 7, one of those laws of the universe that we tend to accept without question, and today it appears to be true. The next one smashes into me with a great slap, and I stagger for a moment trying to keep upright. I don't wait for another, and instead launch myself into the water. It's only feet deep, but enough to swim, and I quickly roll onto my back and kick hard with my legs, and use my arms like flippers, how I imagine a seal might do. I also imagine a great big shark, which I know likes seals, suddenly appearing and taking a chunk out of my side. But there aren't any big sharks here, only dogfish, which are a kind of mini shark. The trawlers catch them and throw most of them back because they're just not worth enough money. How depressing, I think to myself. All those sweet little dogfish, murdered for nothing. There's often scores of them washed up onto the beach. How sad, I think to myself. But perhaps the crabs are grateful. Then something extraordinary happens. The cold gets into my body and I stop thinking, and I'm just swimming in the cold sea, and it's cold and it's salty, and I don't have time to think. It's just happening. My body is vibrating from the inside as the cold seeps into my core. My mind expands, not the thinking mind, but the awareness mind, and it's as if everything is bigger and brighter and somehow more real. I am for a moment entirely present. It's like time does not exist, and for that internal moment I feel completely content. Oops, a voice comes into my head. I'm not sure you deserve contentment, old boy. And that thought brings me back into analysing what's happening to me and where I am, and I turn to look back at the beach at the other swimmers, chatting and dressing, and I think I'm going to get cold and I don't want to get sick, and I had better get out. I try and savour my last few strokes as I head towards the beach, but the moment has passed and I'm firmly back in my head again. Never mind, there's always tomorrow, I think to myself, as I stagger to my feet and wade back towards the spot where I'd left my clothes. They're quite close to the water by now, and might easily have got soaked if I'd been in any longer. How quickly the tide comes in, and yet impossible to see as it's doing it. It seems silly to have to time everything and measure everything. It's meant to make life simpler, but it also makes life more complicated. What's remarkable about the tide is that it changes every day, and if you are to swim at high tide, which most of the swimmers do, you have to swim at different times of the day. It catches me out often as I get into a daily routine, which I tell myself is a healthy, regular discipline. But in reality, life is constantly changing, and by wanting things to be the same, I'm asking for the impossible. The fish and the birds and the animals don't need to measure time. They know instinctively when the tide is coming in or going out, even though it changes every day, and we think they're just dumb animals. But we can't work out the tide times without Google. At that moment I look up, and there she is, a colossal silver globe hovering in the winter sky. The ancients believed that women were represented by the moon and men by the sun, the negative and positive forces of the universe, like in the opposite polarities of electricity, or any form of energy in fact. One cannot be without the other, and one is no better than the other. In modern culture, in the West at least, we see cold as bad and hot as good. But of course, if you lived in a really hot country, it would be the other way around. It also depends on what you're used to. When Charles Darwin visited Tierra del Fuego, his men found it extremely cold. They put on all their clothes and huddled around the campfire. But the natives, who were literally naked, were perfectly happy. Air conditioning is just as bad for the environment as central heating. In fact, air conditioning and fridges use heat in order to cool. I remember my dad telling me that when I was a kid. So there isn't really any difference between hot and cold. One is in partnership with the other, and it must be the same with everything, including men and women. I can't have a conversation with my girlfriend without her repeating the words patriarchy and misogyny, which have become part of the lexicon for her generation. But in reality, all forces are equal and opposite, and women don't need to dominate like men have done for so long to become who they already are. You cannot separate man from woman, or hot from cold, or the sun from the moon, or the positive or negative poles of anything. One cannot exist without the other. In our compulsion to understand, by measuring and labelling everything, we polarised ourselves. That's good and that's bad, we say. But what we regard as good one day is bad the next. It changes with the tides. Before I realise it, I've managed to dry myself and get my clothes on. My fingers have turned white and I stuff them down my trousers to get warm. As I walk past a gaggle of women, one of them recognises me as a newcomer and smiles, and I raise my hand in greeting, but don't stop. Maybe I'll pluck up the courage to talk to one of them next time. I like swimming alone. Even as a kid at school, I didn't feel part of the group, especially after getting my front teeth knocked out playing soccer. When I finally got the ball, someone would take it off me. Well, what's the fun in that? I feel pretty good, actually. I've had some exercise. I've been in the sea. Okay, hang on. You don't have to make a list. Just put one foot in front of the other. That's it. Notice how the sole of the foot feels when it touches the ground. Don't analyse it. Just experience it. Just be it. That's better. And the cold breeze gently strokes my face, and I slowly fill my lungs with Ramsgate air, and a seagull swoops up above the cliff into the Turner sky, and the sea heaves below and sparkles in the cold afternoon light. And once more, for that moment, I'm at peace.